There is a moment that happens before every major comeback, and almost nobody recognizes it when they're inside it. They think they're failing. They think they're losing ground. They think life is moving everyone else forward, while somehow leaving them behind. But what they're actually experiencing is the collapse of an identity that can no longer carry them where they're meant to go. If you're an empath, you've probably spent years misunderstanding your own strength. Not because you're weak, because your strength doesn't look like strength. You can walk into a room and feel tension before anyone speaks. You can sense dishonesty before evidence appears. You can detect shifts in energy, emotion, motivation, and intention long before other people catch on. The problem is that most empaths spend the first half of their lives treating these abilities like liabilities. They apologize for being sensitive. They apologize for needing space. They apologize for noticing things. Apologize for feeling deeply. And after enough years of doing that, something dangerous begins to happen. They stop trusting themselves. The person who can read everyone else becomes unable to read their own value. The person who sees through masks starts believing the masks that other people wear. The person who understands everyone becomes the only person they don't understand. And that's where the story changes. Because what looks like your lowest point is often the point where your nervous system finally refuses to continue the old pattern. Think about it. How many times have you carried emotional weight that wasn't yours? How many times have you become the therapist, the rescuer, the fixer, the emotional shock absorber for everyone around you? How many times have you walked away exhausted after helping people who would never do the same? For you, the empath doesn't usually collapse because life is hard. The empath collapses because they spent years carrying lives that were never theirs to carry. There's a difference, a massive difference. Most people get tired from effort. Empaths get tired from absorption. They absorb moods. They absorb expectations. They absorb guilt. They absorb responsibility. They absorb other people's chaos until they can no longer tell where their emotions end and someone else's begin. And eventually, the system overloads. The old version of you reaches a limit. Not because you're broken, because you've reached capacity. And when capacity is reached, transformation begins. The comeback isn't starting when things get better. The comeback starts when you finally stop volunteering for your own depletion. That moment is subtle. Nobody applauds it. Nobody throws a parade. Sometimes it looks like saying no. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like walking away. Sometimes it looks like refusing to explain yourself. Sometimes it looks like disappointing people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. It's usually the first sign. Watch carefully. The moment an empath begins reclaiming their power, certain people become uncomfortable. Not because the empath became selfish, because access changed. People who were used to unlimited emotional access suddenly encounter limits. People who expected immediate responses suddenly encounter space. People who depended on emotional labor suddenly encounter accountability. They don't always like it. In fact, some of them will call the new version of you cold. Some will call you distant. Some will say you've changed. They're right. You have changed. You're no longer confusing self-sacrifice with love. You're no longer confusing exhaustion with loyalty. You're no longer confusing emotional suffering with virtue. And that's where the comeback gains momentum. Because energy begins returning. Think of your attention as currency. Every day you're spending it somewhere. For years, many empaths invest almost all of it outward. What does this person need? How does that person feel? How can I help? How can I fix this? How can I make things easier? The focus remains external. Meanwhile, their own dreams sit untouched. Their own goals collect dust. Their own voice grows quieter. Then something happens. Pain reaches a threshold. Disappointment reaches a threshold. Betrayal reaches a threshold. And attention starts turning inward. Shift changes everything. Because the same awareness you've used to understand others can now be used to understand yourself. Once an empath starts observing themselves with the same depth they've given everyone else, the game changes completely. You begin noticing patterns. You begin noticing who drains you. You begin noticing what environments weaken you. You begin noticing which conversations leave you energized and which ones leave you depleted. You begin noticing how often you've ignored your instincts. And perhaps most importantly, you begin noticing how often your intuition was right. Realization is powerful. Because confidence doesn't come from positive thinking. Confidence comes from evidence. Every empath has a mountain of evidence they ignored. Think back. How many times did you sense something was off? How many times did your gut warn you? How many times did you overlook a red flag because you wanted to see the best in someone? How many times did reality eventually confirm what you already knew? The comeback begins when you stop treating your intuition like a suggestion and start treating it like intelligence. Because that's what it is. Not magic, not fantasy. Pattern recognition. Your brain has been collecting data for years, micro-expressions, tone shifts, behavior changes, inconsistencies, unspoken signals. Tiny details most people overlook. And somewhere beneath conscious awareness, your mind connects those dots, and a feeling appears. Most people dismiss it. The empath feels it. The empowered empath trusts it. That's a different person entirely. The world changes when an empath trusts themselves. Not because circumstances instantly improve, because perception improves. Perception controls action. Action controls outcomes. You stop entering situations that don't align with you. You stop chasing approval. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop convincing people to see your value. You stop auditioning for roles in lives where you were never meant to stay. And suddenly, something incredible happens. You have energy, real energy, not survival energy, not emergency energy, creative energy, focused energy, purposeful energy, the kind of energy that builds, the kind of energy that creates, the kind of energy that transforms. For years, your emotional bandwidth was occupied. Now it's available. Imagine what happens when someone who can deeply understand people finally directs that understanding toward building a life they actually want. It's dangerous in the best possible way, because empaths often underestimate their potential. They spent so much time supporting other people's visions that they rarely develop confidence in their own. But once they do, progress accelerates. Not gradually, exponentially, because they already possess the observation skills. They already possess the emotional intelligence. They already possess the awareness. The missing ingredient was ownership. Ownership of their attention. Ownership of their time. Ownership of their identity. Ownership of their future. And ownership changes behavior. Watch any comeback story closely. External changes always follow internal decisions. The world sees results. The person experiences choices. A choice to stop tolerating. Choice to stop shrinking, a choice to stop waiting, a choice to stop abandoning themselves. These decisions seem small, they're not. Tiny shifts in direction create massive differences over time. A plane leaving Los Angeles and changing course by a few degrees doesn't arrive in the same destination, neither do you. The empath entering their comeback phase doesn't become a different human overnight. Simply begin making different decisions consistently, and consistency compounds. One boundary becomes two. 2 become 10. 10 become a lifestyle. One act of self-respect becomes a habit. That habit becomes identity. Identity becomes destiny. This is why some people won't recognize you during this season. They're expecting access to the old version. The version that explained everything. The version that tolerated everything. The version that absorbed everything. That person is disappearing, not because you're becoming harder, because you're becoming clearer. Clarity often looks harsh to people who benefited from confusion. Remember that. When you've spent years giving people unrestricted access, healthy boundaries can feel extreme. But they're not extreme. They're normal. What's extreme is sacrificing your mental peace to maintain someone else's comfort. What's extreme is ignoring your instincts repeatedly. What's extreme is carrying emotional burdens that belong to other adults. The comeback requires a new standard for relationships. New standard for opportunities, a new standard for treatment, a new standard for self-respect, and standards change outcomes. You no longer ask, can I endure this? You ask, does this align with who I'm becoming? That's a different question, a more powerful question, because endurance can keep you trapped. Alignment moves you forward. Many empaths survive situations they should have left years earlier. Not because they lack intelligence, because they possess excessive empathy without equal boundaries. They understand everyone. They justify everyone. They forgive everyone, except themselves. And eventually they realize something. Understanding someone doesn't obligate you to remain available to them. Compassion does not require proximity. You can wish someone well and still walk away. You can love someone and still establish distance. You can understand someone's pain without making it your responsibility. These realizations are life-changing because they release trapped energy. Think about how much mental bandwidth gets consumed when you're constantly managing someone else's emotions. How much creativity disappears. How much focus disappears. How much peace disappears. Now imagine reclaiming that energy. Imagine redirecting it toward your goals, your growth, your future. That's where the comeback becomes visible. People start noticing changes. Your presence changes. Your posture changes. Your voice changes. Your decisions change. Not because you're trying to appear confident, because confidence naturally emerges when self-betrayal decreases. That's an important distinction. Most people think confidence is something you build. Often it's something you uncover. It's what remains after chronic self-abandonment stops. The empath who trusts themselves speaks differently, moves differently, chooses differently, and others notice, not consciously at first. But humans are constantly reading signals. We detect certainty. We detect a hesitation. We detect congruence. We detect internal conflict. The old version of you may have communicated uncertainty without realizing it, not because you lacked value, because you questioned your own value. Now that changes, because experience has taught you something. You survived. Everything you thought would destroy you didn't. The rejection didn't. The betrayal didn't. The disappointment didn't. The loneliness didn't. The setbacks didn't. You adapted. You learned. You evolved. Somewhere along the way, resilience replaced fear. Not completely. Fear still exists, but it no longer drives. It rides in the passenger seat instead of holding the steering wheel. That's growth. The comeback isn't about becoming fearless. It's about becoming directed. You move anyway, you act anyway, you trust anyway, you create anyway, you pursue anyway, and momentum begins building. Momentum is powerful because it creates evidence. Evidence creates belief. Belief creates action. Action creates more evidence. The cycle reinforces itself. This is why the empath's comeback can seem sudden to outsiders. People think it happened overnight. It didn't. What they're witnessing is accumulated internal work finally becoming visible. Years of lessons, years of observations, years of pain transformed into wisdom, years of silence transformed into clarity, years of confusion transformed into direction. Breakthrough appears sudden because nobody saw the preparation. But preparation was happening the entire time. Every disappointment taught discernment. Every betrayal taught awareness. Every ending taught detachment. Every challenge taught resilience. Nothing was wasted. That's one of the biggest misconceptions about difficult seasons. People assume nothing is happening. Something is always happening. The roots are growing, and roots grow in darkness. Nobody celebrates root growth. Nobody posts pictures of root growth. Nobody receives recognition for root growth. But without roots, nothing survives. The empath's comeback is built on roots, invisible foundations. Emotional intelligence, self-awareness, pattern recognition, adaptability, perspective. These qualities become assets once they're directed properly. And that's exactly what's happening now. You're directing them differently. You're no longer studying people solely to understand them. You're studying patterns to protect your future. You're no longer reading energy solely to help others. You're reading energy to make better decisions. You're no longer sensing problems and ignoring them. You're responding accordingly. That's power. Quiet power. The kind of power that doesn't need validation. The kind of power that doesn't need attention. The kind of power that changes everything without announcing itself. The strongest transformations are often silent. No dramatic speeches. No public declarations. Just different behavior. Different standards. Different choices. Then one day people look at you and wonder what happened. What happened is simple. You stopped leaking energy. You stopped outsourcing self-worth. You stopped volunteering for unnecessary suffering. You stopped confusing familiarity with destiny. You stopped mistaking emotional intensity for genuine connection. And because of that, future changed. Many empaths remain attached to versions of themselves that no longer fit. The caretaker, the rescuer, the peacemaker, the emotional support system. These identities feel safe because they're familiar. But familiarity isn't always growth. Sometimes familiarity is just repetition, and repetition can become a prison. The comeback requires releasing identities that once protected you but now limit you. That's uncomfortable. Identity shifts always are. Because you're not merely changing habits. You're changing who you believe you are. And every major transformation involves a period of uncertainty. You don't fully identify with the old self anymore. But the new self isn't completely established either. That's the bridge. Most people turn back on the bridge. They return to old patterns because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. The empath entering their comeback phase does something different. They keep walking. Even when the destination isn't visible. Even when progress feels slow. even when nobody understands, because something inside them knows the old life is no longer an option, knows the old patterns no longer work, knows the old identity no longer fits. That internal knowing becomes fuel, and fuel matters, because transformation requires energy. Fortunately, energy increases when alignment increases. Every time you honor your intuition, energy increases. Every time you establish a boundary, energy increases. Every time you choose self-respect over approval, energy increases. Every time you stop abandoning yourself, energy increases. These gains accumulate. Then opportunity begins appearing. Not because the universe suddenly changed, because your perception changed. You notice opportunities you previously overlooked. You pursue opportunities you previously feared. You create opportunities you previously doubted. That's a critical distinction. The comeback isn't passive, it's active. You participate in it. You become a co-creator rather than a spectator. And that changes everything. Because victims wait, creators move. For years, some empaths unknowingly adopted a victim mindset disguised as kindness. They believed giving more would solve everything. Understanding more would solve everything. Sacrificing more would solve everything. Eventually, reality teaches a harder lesson. No amount of self-sacrifice can compensate for lack of self-respect. The lesson hurts, but it liberates. Because once learned, behavior changes. And changed behavior produces changed outcomes. Now you're no longer asking people to choose you. You're choosing yourself. You're no longer hoping people recognize your value. You're recognizing it first. You're no longer seeking permission to become who you were meant to be. You're proceeding without it. That's where the comeback becomes unstoppable. Not because obstacles disappear, because dependence disappears. You stop depending on external validation. You stop depending on perfect conditions. You stop depending on universal approval. You stop depending on everyone understanding your journey. You move forward regardless. That's freedom. Real freedom. The kind that originates internally. The kind nobody can grant and nobody can remove. And when an empath discovers internal freedom, their entire reality shifts. Because empathy without boundaries creates exhaustion. Empathy with boundaries creates influence. Empathy without self-respect creates depletion. Empathy with self-respect creates leadership. Empathy without direction creates confusion. Empathy with direction creates impact. You were never meant to shrink your awareness. You were meant to refine it. You were never meant to stop caring. You were meant to care wisely. You were never meant to harden your heart. You were meant to strengthen your standards. There's a difference, a profound difference. One closes you off. The other protects what matters. The comeback isn't transforming you into someone cold. It's transforming you into someone clear. Clear about who you are. Clear about what you deserve. Clear about where you're going. Clear about what no longer belongs in your life. Clarity is powerful because it eliminates negotiation. You stop arguing with reality. You stop explaining red flags away. You stop making excuses for repeated behavior. You see what's there, then you respond. That sounds simple, it's revolutionary. Because most suffering persists through denial. The empath entering their comeback phase is done denying, done rationalizing, done minimizing, done settling. And because of that, progress accelerates. The future begins opening, not magically, strategically. You become more selective, more intentional, more focused. You invest attention where it produces results. You invest energy where it creates growth. You invest time where it aligns with purpose. That level of intentionality changes outcomes faster than people realize. The world rewards focused energy. Scattered energy produces scattered results. Focused energy produces momentum. Momentum produces breakthroughs. Breakthroughs change trajectories. The most exciting part is that you're probably closer than you think. Most people assume transformation happens after confidence arrives. The truth is confidence often arrives after action. You take the step. Confidence follows. You establish the boundary. Then confidence follows. You make the decision. Then confidence follows. Waiting for certainty delays progress. Movement creates certainty. The empath's comeback isn't happening someday. It's already happening. Every moment you choose authenticity over performance. Every moment you choose truth over comfort. Every moment you choose growth over familiarity. Every moment you choose self-respect over approval. These moments appear insignificant. They're not. They're constructing an entirely new future. Brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. The person you're becoming isn't emerging from nowhere. They've been there all along, beneath the conditioning, beneath the guilt, beneath the expectations, beneath the fear, beneath the habits, beneath the roles you accepted. beneath the versions of yourself that were built for survival instead of fulfillment. Now that those layers are falling away, you're beginning to see what was always there. Strength without aggression, intuition without apology, compassion without self-erasure, awareness without confusion, purpose without permission, and a level of personal power that can no longer be contained by the patterns that once defined your life, which is why the people who only knew the old version may struggle to understand you. Why environments that once felt familiar may suddenly feel restrictive. Why opportunities that once seemed impossible now appear reachable. Why your instincts feel louder. Why your standards feel stronger. Why your vision feels clearer. Why your energy feels different. Because you're no longer preparing for the comeback. You are living inside the first stages of it. Every decision you make from this point forward is determining how far it goes, how powerful it becomes, how completely it transforms the landscape of your life, and how much of your true potential finally gets expressed into the world, instead of remaining hidden beneath years of adaptation, accommodation, hesitation, and silence. And once that process begins, once the empath stops abandoning themselves, and starts standing beside themselves with the same loyalty they once reserved for everyone else, the trajectory changes in ways that most people cannot predict, because the greatest force in your life was never outside of you. It was the attention, awareness, emotional intelligence, resilience, and insight you were giving away. And now that it is returning home, now that it is being directed with intention, now that it is being invested in your own future, the next chapter starts taking shape through every boundary you honor, every instinct you trust, every opportunity you pursue, every standard you uphold, every truth you refuse to ignore, every ounce of energy you reclaim, every version of yourself you outgrow, every step you take toward the life that has been waiting for you on the other side of your own recognition of who you have become and who you are. Still becoming as this momentum continues to build and reveal possibilities that once seemed beyond reach and now feel increasingly inevitable as you continue forward without looking back at the person you needed to be in order to survive, but no longer need to be in order to thrive.